When most people think of Idaho, they think of wide open spaces, mountain ranges that stretch to the horizon, rivers running cold and clear through pine forests. Quiet, remote, and peaceful. But here's the thing about wide open spaces. They're very good at hiding things. Idaho has a darkness to it that most people never see. A history written in blood on the Oregon Trail. A prison that held over a century of suffering within its sandstone walls. And caves beneath the desert floor that the native people who lived here for thousands of years refused to enter. Tonight we go to 3 places in Idaho where the quiet is broken by something you cannot explain. Where the emptiness is not empty at all. Where the darkness has teeth. Welcome to my channel. Stay with me until the end, because the last one goes somewhere underground that you may never want to visit. Old Idaho Penitentiary. 100 years of suffering in sandstone. There is a building in Boise, Idaho, made of sandstone quarried by the very prisoners who were then locked inside it. Think about that for a moment. The men who built their own prison, who cut the stone, laid the walls, raised the towers that would keep them trapped for years, sometimes decades, sometimes until they died. The old Idaho Penitentiary operated for exactly 101 years, from 1872 to 1973. In that time, it held over 13,000 inmates. It witnessed riots, executions, escapes, and murders. It was a place where human beings were treated less than human, and where that treatment left a mark that a century of abandonment has done nothing to erase. Today is a museum, but the things that happened inside its walls did not leave when the last warden locked the gates. The history of the old Idaho Penitentiary is a catalog of suffering. In its early decades, conditions were medieval, overcrowding, brutal punishment, and almost no medical care. Inmates died of disease, violence, and in several cases, at the end of a rope on the prison gallows. The gallows room was used to execute 10 men over the course of the prison's history. The last execution was in 1957. The wooden platform, the trapdoor, the beam overhead, all still there. Visitors who enter the room describe an instant change in atmosphere. A heaviness, a drop in temperature that has nothing to do with the building's ventilation. In multiple documented cases, the feeling of hands on their shoulders when no one is standing behind them. The most notorious inmate in the penitentiary's history was Harry Orchard, a labor terrorist and assassin who confessed to over 17 murders. Orchard was sentenced to death, but ultimately had his sentence commuted to life in prison. He died in 1954, having spent nearly 50 years inside its walls. His cell has been preserved. People who stand in Orchard's cell report feeling watched intensely and uncomfortably. Several visitors have captured what appear to be orbs and shadow figures in photographs taken inside, even with modern phones that don't produce lens flare in those conditions. The most haunted section of the old Idaho Penitentiary is not the gallows. It's not death row. It's a section of solitary confinement cells known by one name among both inmates and guards. Siberia was where the prison sent its most difficult inmates, the ones who fought, who refused to cooperate, who couldn't be controlled in the general population. The cells were dark, cold, and completely isolated. Men were kept there for weeks, sometimes months, with minimal human contact. No sunlight, no sound except the echoes of their own thoughts. The psychological damage inflicted in Siberia was immense. Men went in difficult and came out broken. or sometimes men, didn't come out the same way at all. Today, Siberia is the most paranormally active section of the entire penitentiary. Ghost hunters and paranormal investigators who have spent the night in this section, and several documented teams have, report experiences that range from unsettling to genuinely terrifying. One team from a Pacific Northwest paranormal research group set up audio recorders in 3 of the Siberia cells overnight in 2019. In the morning, reviewing the recordings, they found 23 distinct instances of what sounded like a human voice. The clearest recording, captured at 2:47 a.m. in the center cell, is a male voice that says clearly and slowly, "Get out of my cell." If Siberia is the most active, Cell House 5 is the one that paranormal investigators refuse to return to alone. Cell House 5 was the maximum security block, home to the most violent, most dangerous inmates the prison ever held. The energy here, multiple investigators describe, feels different from the rest of the building, as if whatever is left in those cells is not confused or lost. It knows exactly where it is, and it does not like company. A security guard who worked the museum in the early 2000s described his experience on his very first solo night shift. Walking through Cell House 5 on his routine check, he heard what sounded like multiple men talking in low voices inside the cells around him. He stopped walking to listen where the voices were coming from, but the voices also stopped. And when he started walking, the voices resumed. The voices were just clear enough to know they were voices. He completed his round as quickly as he could and did not enter Cell House 5 alone again for the rest of the time he worked at the museum. The old Idaho penitentiary held 13,000 human beings over 101 years. Some of them were guilty of terrible things. Some of them were broken by what happened to them inside those walls. Prisoners are still in their cells even after death, still in Siberia, still standing at the gallows, waiting for freedom. Shoshone Ice Caves, the frozen gateway to the spirit world. Imagine standing in the middle of the Idaho desert. It's summer, the sun is hammering down on the sagebrush and the lava rock. The temperature is pushing 95 degrees, 10 feet in front of you. There's a hole in the ground, breathing cold air. Below freezing cold, like standing in front of an open freezer on the hottest day of the year. Now imagine being a member of the Shoshone people, living on this land for thousands of years, and knowing in the very core of your bones that you do not go into that hole. That is the Shoshone Ice Caves, and the Shoshone people were right. The Shoshone Ice Caves are a lava tube, a tunnel formed by ancient volcanic activity when the outer shell of a lava flow cooled and hardened while molten rock continued flowing through the interior, eventually draining and leaving a hollow tube behind. The tube stretches over 1,000 feet beneath the Idaho desert floor. What makes it extraordinary and deeply strange is the ice. Because of the unique airflow dynamics of the tube, cold air from winter settles into the cave and is trapped there, unable to escape. The result is a cave system where temperatures stay between 18 and 28 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, even when the desert above is baking in summer heat. The ice inside is ancient. Formations that have grown over hundreds and possibly thousands of years. Ice columns, ice floors, ice walls. A frozen world existing in permanent darkness beneath a desert landscape. And in that frozen darkness, people hear things they cannot explain. The Shoshone people who lived in this region for millennia did not simply avoid the caves out of superstition. Their avoidance was specific, intentional, and deeply embedded in their spiritual tradition. The caves were considered a threshold, a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead was dangerously thin. Elders passed down strict warnings. Do not call out inside the caves, because something might answer. Do not go in alone or at night. And above all, do not go deeper than the light reaches. These are not the warnings of people who were afraid of the dark. These are the warnings of people who knew from generations of experience that something in those caves was not safe. When American settlers first began exploring the caves in the 1800s, they largely dismissed these warnings. Several of the early explorers reported experiences they struggled to describe. A feeling of being followed through the tunnels despite being alone. Voices echoing from sections of the cave that the sound could not physically have reached. And in at least 2 documented cases, men who entered the caves and became so disoriented they could not find the exit despite the tunnel being essentially a straight line. The caves are now a tourist attraction, with guided tours that take visitors through the lit sections of the tunnel. Even on these organized, well-lit tours, the experiences persist. Tour guides, people who walk this cave multiple times a day, every day of the season, have their own stories. One guide who led tours for several seasons in the early 2010s described a recurring experience that he and other guides shared but rarely discussed with tourists. The sound of footsteps on the ice floor, coming from the direction of the unlit section of the cave, the section beyond the tour boundary. Clear and deliberate footsteps on ice. When the tour would stop and listen, the footsteps would stop too. Multiple visitors have reported hearing their names being called out in a clearly and recognizable voice from somewhere deeper in the cave. One woman on a 2017 tour grabbed her husband's arm and asked why he called her name. But the husband did not call her name, and no one near her had spoken during the time she heard her name being called. Later on, she said that the voice she heard sounded exactly like her deceased mother. She left the tour immediately. She described the experience not as frightening, but as something she wasn't ready for. Here is the detail that makes the Shoshone Ice Caves truly chilling. The tourist tour covers only a portion of the total cave system. Beyond the lit section, beyond the boundary markers, the lava tube continues, deeper, darker, and colder, into sections that are not open to the public. The official reason is safety. The unofficial reason, among people who have worked at the site for years, is less specific but consistently similar. Something about the deeper sections feels wrong in a way that's hard to articulate. Not dangerous in a structural sense. Wrong in a way that makes experienced, rational adults turn around and walk back toward the light without being entirely sure why. The Shoshone called it a gateway, a door to somewhere else that's still open. Massacre Rock State Park, where the trail ran red. In the summer of 1862, families were making their way west along the Oregon Trail, the Great Migration route that carried hundreds of thousands of American settlers across the continent toward a new life. They crossed rivers, mountains, and prairies. They buried loved ones along the way. They kept moving because stopping meant dying. In August of that year, a group of wagon trains reached a stretch of the Snake River Plain in what is now southern Idaho. The landscape here is dramatic. Massive volcanic rock formations rising from the desert floor, the river cutting through, the trail narrowing between the boulders into a tight, unavoidable passage. It was a perfect place for an ambush. On August 9th and 10th, 1862, a series of attacks on Oregon Trail wagon trains in this area left at least 10 immigrants dead and dozens more wounded. The attacks were part of the broader and devastating conflict between Native American tribes and a relentless wave of settlers moving through their ancestral lands, a conflict driven by broken treaties, displacement, and violence on both sides that left wounds that have never fully healed. The immigrants who died were buried quickly, sometimes in the trail itself, so that the wagon wheels of those coming behind would pack the earth down and protect the graves from disturbance. Their names are mostly known. Their resting places are mostly not. The site became known as Massacre Rocks, a name that carries the full weight of what happened there, and that the land seems to remember in its own way. Today, Massacre Rocks is a state park, campgrounds, hiking trails, a boat ramp on the Snake River. Families come here in the summer. People set up tents and build fires and sleep under the Idaho stars. But at night, hikers and campers experience unexplainable things. The most consistently reported experience at Massacre Rocks is sound, specifically sounds that belong to a different century. Campers have reported waking in the middle of the night to what they describe as the unmistakable sound of wagon wheels rolling across the ground. Not a car, not a piece of equipment. The specific, rhythmic, wooden-wheeled sound of a wagon moving across dirt and rock. There are no wagons at Massacre Rock State Park. One family camping there in the summer of 2018. Each of the family member reported hearing horses in the night. Not distant, but near the family's campsite. The sound of hooves on rock, the snort and breath of horses moving around the perimeter of their campsite. When the father unzipped the tent and looked out, there was nothing, no horses, no footprints. All 5 of them had heard the noises, but were unsure of who or what made those noises. But the experience that has driven the most campers out of Massacre Rocks in the middle of the night is the circling. People sleeping in tents describe waking to the sound of something moving around the outside of their tent. Not walking past, not moving through the campsite, but circling around tents. Slowly and deliberately circling the tent, close enough to brush the fabric for minutes at a time. When campers check outside, most of them wait until morning. There is nothing, no tracks, no disturbance in the dirt or grass. No animal that would behave that way without leaving any evidence. A solo camper who posted his account online in 2020 described lying in his sleeping bag at 2 in the morning, listening to something make 3 complete, slow circles around his one-man tent. He had a flashlight and a knife on hand just in case. He said the reason he didn't unzip the tent was not fear. It was the complete certainty in that moment that whatever was outside was not something a flashlight or a knife would help with. He packed up and drove away. He said the drive out through the dark desert, past the rock formations, was the longest 15 minutes of his life. Beyond the specific experiences, the sounds, the circling, the inexplicable sense of being surrounded, there is a broader atmospheric quality to Massacre Rocks that visitors describe with remarkable consistency. The feeling of being watched by something unseen. It feels heavy, like being watched with an evil stare, particularly at dusk when the light turns red on the volcanic rocks and the shadows lengthen across the desert. It feels like something is remembering how to come back to life. The immigrants who died here were moving toward a new life, but never made it to their journey, and their journey ended in those rocky narrows beside the Snake River. Carries their interrupted momentum still. The sense of people who were going somewhere and simply never arrived. The Oregon Trail was 2,000 miles of hope and hardship. Massacre Rocks was the stretch where hope ran out, where families who had come so far found out just how far they still had to go and didn't make another step. Their graves are still here. Their names are on markers by the trail. But at night is when they come back from the dead. Three places in a state that most people overlook when they think about haunting places in the country. Three stories that prove that darkness doesn't require a big city or a famous landmark. Sometimes it's a sandstone prison where men built their own cage and never found their way out of it. It's a frozen cave beneath the desert that the people who knew this land best refused to enter. And sometimes it's a stretch of open ground beside a river, where families were going somewhere wonderful and never made it to the final destination, and where the land still carries the weight of that unfinished journey. Idaho is quiet. It is beautiful in a way that takes your breath away. But in the quiet, if you listen, really listen, you'll hear something that the open spaces can't quite swallow. Have you ever been to any of these places? Have you camped at Massacre Rocks, toured the old penitentiary, or gone down into the ice caves and felt something you couldn't explain? Drop it in the comments if you have been to any of these places, or if you've been here, what was your experience? Please subscribe and hit the thumb up, because my next video we're going somewhere even darker. Another state, another set of stories that history tried to bury and couldn't.